LSU head football coach Brian Kelly set the internet on fire today.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So subscribe to the YouTube page, and you will get up-to-date information right here at Locked On LSU. I'm going to do a deep dive into Brian Kelly's comments today, the comments that went viral and the subsequent comments that didn't go viral. Do we agree with it? We'll get into that, but first, I got to let y'all know that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go, now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Okay, let's get into it because Jacques Doucet of WAFB 9 Sports had a long sit down with Brian Kelly. And I think Brian Kelly was very open and honest. It was a nearly 30-minute discussion talking about, Brian Kelly's career so far at LSU, his vision moving forward. And Jacques asked the questions that I think all of us have as fans have for Brian Kelly of, recapping what's happened and previewing what's coming next and what's the best way to get there. But there was one of the nearly 30-minute interview, one 5-second clip and just a handful of words that has set all of the internet ablaze. It gone viral. There have been articles written about it. All of the court of public opinion has something to say about just those few words that were plucked from the interview and then spread like wildfire. What he said to Jacques Doucet, again, first and foremost, shout out to Jacques. Jacques is the best. And if you haven't given it a listen in its entirety, I'm sure at this point, if you're an LSU fan, you've already heard the comments that have gone viral. But if you haven't listened to the interview in its entirety, I highly, highly recommend it. It's really insightful. And Jacques did a great job. So shout out to WAFB. But the little tidbits that are going viral is Brian Kelly saying, we are not in the business of buying players. This spread like crazy. There's several articles written about it, so on and so forth. He said this in response to a question that Jacques had about the defensive line. That's what we've been talking about in this podcast for the last few weeks. It's what Brian Kelly said was their number one priority in the offseason, and that is securing a defensive tackle in the transfer portal. So it's fair that Jacques would ask that question. And in a long answer, a little piece was plucked from that of Brian Kelly saying, we're not in the business of buying players. Now, the reason why this is being spread like wildfire is because, for the most part, I believe it's being misinterpreted. I believe that it's really easy to see those words written in a tweet or in a graphic and feel some type of way about it. Because you might tell yourself, what do you mean you're not in the business of buying players? Everyone is in the business of buying players. Hello, take a look around at the current landscape that we're looking at in college football. If you're not buying players, you're not going to win very many games. So I understand that. But that's the problem that we have of when we just react to a few words of a very long response in a very long interview. How it's been interpreted, I believe, is we're not in the business of paying players. And that is just wrong. Everyone's in the business of paying players. It's the NIL era. It's the NIL world. LSU's not afraid to be in the NIL space. LSU is not afraid to pay players. In fact, every defensive lineman that they've targeted on the transfer portal market, they've had an offer for. If it's not the offer that player wants, well, that's that player's prerogative. But it's not like LSU's afraid to be in on the NIL action. It's not like LSU is afraid to be calling up a collective and asking for a couple of dollars and cents to a certain lawyer at a certain, chicken tycoon. So that's wrong. How it's being interpreted is just flat out wrong. If you think that LSU is not in the business of paying players, you haven't been paying attention. Frankly, LSU's been in the business of paying players before it was legal. Okay, let's not be naive. How I interpret it is, Brian Kelly is saying, if money is your number one prerogative, if money is going to be the only thing that gets you to come here or there or anywhere, then LSU isn't the place for you. I interpret it as, if money is your number one priority, maybe we don't want you here anyways. And frankly, I don't disagree with that. You might, and that's fine. You might be telling yourself that should be the number one priority, and LSU should be outbidding all of these programs. And if you feel that way, then fine. But I disagree, and I disagree vehemently. One little tidbit of what Brian Kelly said, which of course didn't go viral because it's not very convenient for the argument. It's more convenient to just rip apart what somebody says just completely out of context. What he was talking about was, if I go out and I'm speaking from Brian Kelly's perspective, if I go out and I pay 7 figures for a defensive lineman that might not be worth 7 figures, what am I supposed to tell the rest of the locker room that's not making that but probably deserves it? Are we going to be incentivizing players for transferring? Or is that basically the message that I'm sending my locker room? Is, look, you can make a whole lot of money if you just transfer. Make a whole lot more money on the open transfer market than you can make here. No. That's not the market that I would want my program being in. Because I don't need the program that I cheer for, the team that I root for, to be causing a bunch of, unrest and confusion in the locker room because one player who's been here for 4 to 5 years and has been a consistent starter and has done everything that the coach could have asked isn't making as much as insert defensive lineman here just because you're desperate. That sends the wrong message in the locker room, I believe. It sends the message that we prioritize other things over your commitment to this program and what you have done in an LSU uniform. And I'm okay with that. If Brian Kelly believes that, quote unquote, buying players, which again doesn't mean not paying for players, it just means putting money before everything else, outbidding everyone else just to outbid them, that if he believes that upsets the locker room and he's not willing to do that, I'm fine with that. If he feels like that would support unhealthy competition within the locker room and it would make the culture in the locker room more about money and less about winning football games, then I'm fine with that. If it's about respecting your current players and giving your current players and the players that have produced for you and the players that are homegrown LSU players, and even the players that aren't homegrown LSU players, but the players that have shown that they are committed to this program and Brian Kelly's vision and winning games for LSU, in addition to also making money, to being developed as players and getting to the next level, in addition to making money, if that's what Brian Kelly wants to prioritize, I don't have any problem with it whatsoever. I don't disagree with what Brian Kelly is saying, frankly. You know what they say? More money, more problems. And if you start to introduce more and more money, and if you start to introduce money being your number one prerogative and number one priority, and you do that by inviting players into the locker room whose number one priority is making money, then that starts to upset the balance of what Brian Kelly has been starting to build. I have no problem whatsoever with players making money. I'm incredibly pro NIL. I'm very pro players getting what they earn. But what I'm against is money being the number one motivating factor. But I'll be clear. I understand that there's one thing that's unclear about that. And we'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks again for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume from all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Rolling along here, reacting to Brian Kelly's comments that went viral when Brian Kelly sat down with Jacques Doucet of WAFB, and went viral is him saying, "I'm not in the business of buying players." Doesn't mean that he's not in the business of paying players. Everyone is. You have to be. He's not going full-on Dabo. Like, he's not going full-on anti-transfer portal and anti-NIL. That's not what he's saying. The most revealing thing to me is when he said, look, I'm not going to – how am I supposed to explain to the players that have committed themselves to this program and that are not making as much as a guy in the transfer portal? Especially if it's a guy who hasn't done nearly as much as what they have done, not just at LSU, but in college sports in general. I get it. But one thing that's unclear is whether that's the right approach or not. I don't know. Brian Kelly could be dead wrong. Like, Brian Kelly could be completely off base with this approach. Brian Kelly could be completely wrong for not wanting to overpay for players. Brian Kelly could be completely off base for not matching the offers or exceeding the offers that some of these defensive linemen or any player, for that matter, got on the open market. Because it's unclear which formula works in this new era of college football. We're living in a new age. Formerly, the formula for winning college football national championships was the Nick Saban approach of stockpiling talent. One starter goes down, well, your backup is probably good enough to start at pretty much every single other Power 5 team across America, and probably the third guy, and probably the fourth guy, and probably the fifth guy too. Or they would sit on the bench for 3 to 4 years, but it wouldn't matter because they would at least be guaranteed a shot to start at some point and would be guaranteed to compete for national championships. They just have a deeper roster than everybody else. Well, we know that doesn't exist anymore. Because if a player doesn't have a path to seeing the field within year 1 or 2 or, goodness, maybe even 3, they're going to transfer. You can't stockpile talent how you used to. So now that we're living in the infancy stages of the transfer portal as currently constructed in the post-2021 one-time transfer rule, in the post-NIL era since July of 2021, we don't really have much of a sample size to say what's the right approach and what's the wrong approach. We don't really have enough of a sample size to say that Brian Kelly's doing the right thing and that Brian Kelly's not. I think a fair comparison, or maybe a fair antithesis rather, to Brian Kelly's approach of we'll use the transfer portal when we need it. We will use NIL, but we are not going to overpay for players. We are not going to make NIL our number one motivator. I think the antithesis, not perfect, and this is no knock to this program, but I think it could be Lane Kiffin's approach to building Ole Miss's team this year. That Ole Miss got a freaking haul in the transfer portal. Princely Umama, this is a tough one. Princely Umamalayan from Florida, Juice Wells, receiver out of South Carolina. Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle out of Texas A&M. They cut a freaking haul, and not to mention several other transfer portal players that they got in the fall transfer portal window. Like, those guys ain't going there for free. Like, Lane Kiffin, it feels like, has one of the first, like, true, quote-unquote, free agency teams in the SEC. And I know that Jackson Dart has been at Ole Miss now for 3 years. I know it's not every single starter and every single player is a transfer, but when we talk about the first team to truly, really embrace this new era, I look at this Ole Miss team. Maybe Lane Kiffin has the right approach. Maybe Lane Kiffin outbidding everybody else in the, I'll call it, the free agency market in the transfer portal, and plucking the best talent out of the transfer portal. Maybe that is a microwave to success. Maybe Lane Kiffin wins a national championship this year, recreates the same model next year, and then does it again the next year. And maybe that is the new formula for a dynasty. Maybe Brian Kelly's more conservative approach could cost him his job. Like, maybe Brian Kelly is going about this the wrong way, and then LSU is terrible and they can't keep up with the Ole Misses or the Texas A&Ms of the world. I mean, I think we should acknowledge that that is very much so a possibility. But I think we can also acknowledge that maybe Brian Kelly's approach is the right one. Could be. Maybe Lane Kiffin put all of his chips into the middle for this season and they're a college football playoff team, but then they don't have any depth for next season, and maybe the NIL funds aren't available for them next season, and maybe it's kind of a roller coaster of 1 year you're great because you're able to pay more money for certain players, and another year you're not because you don't have those funds available, and that amount of talent isn't in the transfer portal. Maybe it's a little bit more of a tumultuous approach, whereas maybe Brian Kelly's approach is more sustainable. I don't know. Maybe there comes a day where all of these collectives or the donors to the collectives don't see a return on their investment. And they think, well, I just fronted $400,000 to get this 5-star receiver. He collected his check from me and then bolted and went to Ohio State. I'm not giving you any more of my money. Like, that very much so could be the case. I think we can all acknowledge that we don't know what we don't know. And what we don't know is if that model works. But I will say, I don't even know what like Vegas says, but I feel pretty confident in saying, who's favored to win the Natty this year? Georgia. If I had to put my money on any team in America to win the national championship this year, it's Georgia. Georgia isn't some transfer portal heavy kind of team. They didn't ignore it. They did not ignore it. They added via the transfer portal. But Georgia, and what Kirby Smart has built at Georgia, was built with the Nick Saban approach of stockpiling talent, homegrown talent. But maybe that doesn't work anymore. Time will tell. That's not very comfortable to hear, is it? You want to hear that your coach is doing the right thing. I understand where he's coming from, and frankly, I agree with it. But 5 years from now, we might be singing a different tune. Or 5 years from now, we might be saying, Brian Kelly was onto something there. That I can't tell you today. Today's not going to be a day of me blowing smoke and sunshine and rainbows about Brian Kelly. Today is not going to be a day of me saying, everything that LSU's coach is doing is great and everything everyone else is doing is wrong. Because that's not how I feel. But there are several areas of this team, of this roster, of the expectations for this LSU team, or possibly even lack thereof, that Brian Kelly absolutely should be blamed for. That we'll get into coming up next, after just a couple of words from our sponsors. Okay, I want to tell you about Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there is so much to get. There's unique stickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. There's cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. There's hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's also something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now. It is free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? With Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis that you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. So I've been using Yahoo Finance to consolidate all of my accounts into one place, which has made it incredibly easy to manage them. I'm going to be honest with y'all. It's intimidating. It's a world that I don't feel very confident in. But for more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. So whether you're a seasoned investor or you're like me and you're looking for a little bit of extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need in one place. There's a community of over 90 million users each month, and their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. Who doesn't love that? So, for a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. The number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That is yahoofinance.com. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thanks for making us your first listen every single day. All right, so look, I don't disagree with Brian Kelly's comments that he made today. He maybe could have phrased it in a different way, and I feel like that's a theme for a lot of the things that Brian Kelly has said in his tenure as LSU head coach. I understand what the sentiment, maybe could have said it in a different way, maybe without an accent. And look, I don't disagree with him. Is it the right approach? I don't know. Look, he gets paid the big bucks to figure that out, not me. But let's not act like Brian Kelly is blameless in this situation. Why are they even in this situation in the first place to be talking about money to be paid to defensive tackles in the spring transfer portal market? Because they're desperate for a defensive tackle. Why are they desperate for a defensive tackle? Because Brian Kelly didn't prepare for both Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith to enter the NFL draft. That's Brian Kelly's fault. Now, look, maybe Brian Kelly was led astray by one of them or both of them, and they said they were going to come back, and then they decided not to. But still, that's his job as the head coach of this football team, is to know what his players' plans are. You can't just hope that they're going to come back. You can't just assume they're going to come back. You need to know, and you need to have plans in place, replacements in place for if and obviously when they do decide to enter the NFL draft. That the roster finds itself in this position, that position, the defensive tackle position, finds itself with as barren for talent as it does because Brian Kelly did not address that position adequately. Why did they not get any defensive tackles in the fall transfer portal window when, let's be honest, there is better talent in that window? Why didn't Brian Kelly fire the former defensive coaching staff until mid-January when all of those other players that entered the transfer portal in the fall window had already committed to other places? Why would a defensive tackle commit to go to LSU if they knew that they were either going to have a coach and coordinators that were awful, or they didn't know who the coordinator was going to be because Brian Kelly hadn't hired him yet? That was Brian Kelly's decision. He said that, Matt House and this coaching staff has to see through their commitment. They are coaching through the bowl game. That's great and all. But if you knew you were going to fire him, why didn't you just do it? And if you didn't know that you were going to fire them, then you are to blame for that too. Because if you didn't know midway point through the season that you wanted to move on from that coordinator, then maybe you're not as good of a coach as I thought you were. So that's on Brian Kelly too. How bad the defense was last year, that's on Brian Kelly. How bad the defense might be this year because you don't have a defensive tackle, that's on you too. And I understand that they've got bodies, that Jacoby and Guillory will be playing in one of those roles, and you landed Gio Paez in the transfer portal. And I know you're bringing Kimo Makanele over from offense to defense, and everybody might feel okay about that today because it's May, and it's easy to feel good about your football team in May. But come September and come October, if you can't get to the quarterback, that's on you. That's on Brian Kelly. The reason we are in this place to begin with is because of Brian Kelly. So I don't disagree with Brian Kelly's NIL approach. And let's not be silly here. Brian Kelly's not against NIL and paying players. Again, he's not Dabo. He's just saying, look, I have a commitment to my locker room. And I'm not overpaying for a certain player just because I'm desperate. But you're desperate because you put yourself in that situation. Really interesting sit down. Brian Kelly with Jacques Doucet of WAFB. I said it before, I'll say it again. If you did not get an opportunity to watch it, really highly recommend that you do. It was really insightful, really interesting. And if you're going to have an opinion of what Brian Kelly said about not being in the business of buying players, I think that you should probably listen to the entirety of the interview and not just take one snippet that you heard on social media. And if you still feel the same way, that's fine. You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Brian Kelly. But I do think that you would be doing yourself a disservice if you just completely ignored the interview in its entirety, but still had an opinion on it. And look, that's a much larger statement that we could probably apply to much more important things. But great interview with Brian Kelly and Jacques Doucet. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We've got Mailbag Wednesday coming up, so appreciate everybody for getting those questions in. Also, a lot of stuff on the diamond softball, baseballs. LSU softball just competed in the longest SEC tournament game in history. I don't know what it is with LSU and playing in the longest games in league history, but add another one into the mix. LSU baseball, feeling really good about where they are right now, but they are not right exactly where they need to be. We'll continue to break all of that down on the next edition of Locked On LSU.